Hello, good morning. Welcome to another episode of Gardenside Chats with me. My name's Carrie, and today we are not in my garden. As you might see, we're just in some woods behind my house, and today we're going to continue on with our Monday Ask a Gardener series. So we've just got some questions that people have sent us via Facebook or email over the past week, and I'll do my best to answer all of them, and then we'll just continue on next week. First question.
I'm trying to start my own blackberry plants, so when is the best time to put them in the ground? This fall when they go dormant, or put them in the ground next spring?
All right, so the first question is about planting blackberry plants. Can you do it right now, or should you wait until the spring? So the person that asked this question sounds like they have some cuttings that they may have rooted or have already purchased some rooted blackberry plants. That's a really good question. So actually, early fall is a great time to plant a lot of perennial plants. I would not do it right now. It's still a little too warm, but you could do it in September or October. Really kind of depending on the weather. So if for whatever reason our October gets really cold really fast, and it's starting to dip down into the 30s, it's probably past time to plant them. It's a good thing to plant perennial plants in the fall because they have a lot more time to kind of like get settled into their new home. Before they go dormant, send out some like little roots and things, versus planting in the spring when the plant's energy is so focused on putting out leaf growth. Planting perennials in the spring, while like super common, obviously, it can be a little more stressful on the plants because they're focused on leaf production and not root production at that time. So it does depend on the weather, the temperature. Also, I would recommend planting them this fall for a couple reasons. One, I already mentioned because of like getting the roots established in their new home. Also, if you already have them in pots, keeping like a potted plant outside in the winter is kind of tricky because while the blackberry might live just fine in the ground over winter, a pot could be make it too cold of an environment for the roots, and the roots could get damaged from the cold. And it also gets tricky trying to bring it inside in an unheated garage or something. So if you can plant it this fall, I would just make sure that you water it a whole lot because it's usually pretty dry at this time.
Next question. Hello, my ground cherry harvest is booming. Knowing that they reseed, I want to add ground cherries to other areas of my property. When do I put the harvested cherries into the new spots? Immediately, as in by this weekend, or do I wait until next spring?
That's a great question. So the question is about ground cherries and how to get them to reseed in other parts of your garden. So for those of you who don't know, ground cherries are in the tomato family. They're a nightshade, and they look like a tiny tomatillo. We're talking like marble-sized tomatillo, and they're kind of a golden color. And they're called ground cherries because one, they're much sweeter than tomatoes, and two, they're ripe when they fall off the plant and you pick them off the ground and eat them. I bring up the tomatillo component because they have a husk, a papery husk, like tomatillos, that is tan or golden color, and you peel that husk back and you eat the little ground cherry, and I think they're spectacular. I did have them in a garden I had several years ago, and I ate all of the ground cherries, so I didn't get a chance to reseed them, which was unfortunate because you don't see them a whole lot in nurseries or plant centers because they're just slightly uncommon, although they are delicious. So ground cherries reseed pretty readily because since the fruit ripens when it's on the ground, it's easy to not collect all the ground cherries, and then you have a ground cherry that decays over the winter time and the seeds work their way into the soil, and then the next spring some of those seeds germinate and make more ground cherries. So if you want to expand your ground cherry patch from where it already is established, I would just wait until some of the ground cherries fall off the plant, collect them off of the ground, and then move those ground cherries to wherever you want them to be in your garden. Do that now whenever they fall off the plant, and then just set them on top of the ground because you're mimicking what they do naturally, and over time they'll decompose, kind of work their way into the right level of the ground, and next spring you'll have ground cherries.
So plant them now.
So plant them now. Also do more because volunteers, you have a pretty low chance of germination, things could eat them. So, do a whole bunch so that you ensure that you get ground cherries next spring.
All right. The next question is similar to the other perennial one.
Okay.
I have a space, I'm going to skip it. I have a space in front of my house that has 0 sunlight. Literally not any at all. I'm done trying to grow grass in the area because it doesn't happen. Is there anything I can make grow there, like some sort of garden, flower, plants, edible garden, or am I doomed just to need a rock garden? Thank you.
Good question. So this question is about deep shade in a part of your yard and if there's anything that can grow. It sounds like this person can't even grow grass in that area. So that's a great question. We get that question a lot because a lot of people have really, really nice landscaping trees that cast really great shade, but it definitely limits the other plant life that you can have in your yard. This question is actually slightly difficult to answer because there's different types of shade. So are we talking like shade from a building, which is just absolute 100% shade? Or are we talking dense foliage from tall trees, which is considered high dappled shade? So depending on like how severe, I guess, the shade is, you can plant some things. Most of them are natives. So I'm going to continue answering this question as if I know that the shade is coming from, a tree canopy. So you can grow wild leeks. Those grow in the shade. Elderberries can grow in the shade. Pawpaws can grow in the shade. So these are all native edible plants that do grow in wooded settings. So if we're talking like your front yard is similar to a wooded setting and you can't grow grass because there's too many trees, you can try to grow these plants. So leeks are pretty short, they're about this tall. They're highly sought after, so that would be fun to have in your yard. Both pawpaws and elderberries are, one's a shrub and one's a tree. So if you have space for a tree, you can plant pawpaws. And if you only have space for a shrub, you can maybe plant elderberries. We also have success growing wild black raspberries in a pretty densely shaded part of the Veterans Urban Farm. And you get, this over time, you get this nice little thicket of black raspberries that ripen in June. So your options, in summation, your options are definitely limited. I would look at the Missouri Wildflower Nursery catalog. Their catalog is divvied up by soil moisture and also shade or sunlight, which is really helpful in selecting plants that are right for your kind of environment. And if I didn't answer the question precisely, because maybe we're talking like shade thrown from a building or something, please get back in touch with us and we'll amend our answer a little bit.
One more question.
Okay, we'll do one more question.
What's happening to my peppers? The leaves are yellow and brown. The soil has some wood, charcoal, ash, eggshell, fish heads, compost mixed with potting and clay soil. What did I do wrong? Water too much? Too cold? So the pepper leaves are yellow and brown.
Okay, so this question is about what is most likely a disease on pepper plants. So the leaves are yellow and brown, and I don't know if they're falling off or if I just like came up with that in my head. It doesn't matter. So that's a hard question to answer without seeing the plant. So there is a lot of plant diseases, especially in nightshades, and a pepper is a nightshade plant. And with a picture of the diseased area, we can maybe identify what if it's like a fungal issue or bacterial, but it's really hard to identify, give a prognosis without a picture. So if you could send us a picture, that'd be super helpful. I will say that this year at the Veterans Urban Farm, in both the production area and the outdoor classroom, we are experiencing some fungal issues on our peppers, peppers of all varieties. So I'm not sure if that is related to, it's been pretty dry the last week, but it was pretty wet and stormy for a while, which, definitely increases the, the abundance of fungal diseases. So send us a picture and we'll try to be better at, gearing you in the right direction of how to fix your pepper plants.
So somebody has asked a question on the thing. It says, I have a flower bed that has been taken over by poison sumac or oak. How do I get rid of it?
So the question, we just got a question about a flower bed that has been taken over by poison sumac or poison oak. That's a very good question. What to do about it? So this is not an organic remedy, but I've never had poison oak or poison sumac invade any of my gardens, but I've definitely had poison ivy invade our gardens. And so when poison ivy comes in, what I'll do, if it's tiny, I'll just put some gloves on and pull it. And, poison ivy can be like this tall and you can still pull it right out of the ground, especially if it's wet out. So I do that. If I don't get it in time, there's a product, I think from Fertilome, called Stump and Vine Killer. It's not organic, but I picked it up from Ace Hardware in Columbia. And for those types of things, I will get a pair of gloves, pair of pruners, cut the, plant off at the base where it's coming out of the ground, and then paint. The Stump and Vine Killer is a liquid with a paintbrush in it. So you take off the cap and the cap's attached to a paintbrush, and you paint the stump with that herbicide. I like doing that route because you're not just spraying an herbicide, so it's very, very precisely applied. I will say, and I don't know why the manufacturers did this, is it's clear, which is tricky. So what I do before I ever use it for the first time is I dye it with some food coloring so that when I paint it on a little stump or like a little twig, I can see that I treated it and that, it has the herbicide and that it will die. But I've had 100% success with that product. I like it again because it's, a very contained application. I would just recommend dyeing it before you use it so that you know where you treated things. And always wear gloves and then wash your hands afterwards. Do we have time for one more, or is that over time?
Yeah, we can do one more.
Okay, we will actually do one more.
What herbs should I leave in the ground through the winter and will come back next year? If I take an herb inside for the winter, will that save it?
Okay, this is a two-parter. What herbs overwinter in your garden? And then what herbs can you take inside over the winter and take back outside next spring? So I'll answer the first question first. There's a lot of herbs that will overwinter very readily here in Missouri. So, this is not an exhaustive list, but chives, oregano, thyme, bee balm, mint, lemon balm. Those are the ones I've got in my garden that always overwinter. Garlic chives will go crazy. Trickier ones are sage to a certain extent, also rosemary, of course, and lemongrass. So those three, sage to a lesser extent, I've definitely overwintered it successfully just in the garden, but it does seem a little bit more tender than something like chives. Rosemary and lemongrass will not overwinter here. For rosemary, we're just on the cusp of being the right environment for it to live over winter here. But I think our soils are a little too clayey and a little too wet over the winter for it to like be happy. It comes from a milder climate and also with looser soils than we do, so it's used to better drainage. I have dug both of those out of my garden and tried to overwinter them in my house before with no success, but I do know that there are people that do have that success with digging them out and bringing them inside and bringing them back out the next spring. Why is that tricky? Well, that's tricky because inside, especially over winter, is super, super dry in your house because of our heating systems, and they both need a little bit more humidity than your house will give them. But they don't, so a lot of times when they start getting dry because of the dry air, people will take that as, I need to water it more. But you don't want to go down that rabbit hole because, there might be enough moisture around the roots. And if you continue to water it trying to compensate for the dry air, the roots might rot. And see, this is why it's so tricky. I think people have had a lot more success in like a greenhouse situation, overwintering them, where the humidity is a little higher consistently. I don't have, at home my own greenhouse, so I've never tried that, and our greenhouse at work is too small. It's not a 4-season greenhouse. So you can try it. I can't guarantee you because it's so challenging that you would have success. But again, I've met people who have overwintered their rosemary indoors successfully, and I just don't have the knack for it that some people do. All right. So we still have some questions. For those questions that we didn't answer, we'll pick them up, right next week. In the meantime, if you have any more questions or if you know anyone with more gardening questions, please send them our way, and we'll add the questions to our list and keep answering them. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll see you later.